I'm a returning speaker, but I was in a different role the last time, as I explained in my teaser this morning. I'm now in this very special world of air traffic control, where things which, like the thing that just happened before, should not happen. Okay, you don't want your air traffic controller to say, excuse me, I have a resolution problem. Can we just hold for an hour or so until I have this solved? And so this is a very different world. I give you a little bit of insight. This is a typical workstation of an air traffic controller. And you can see that his main instrument of work is this headset. He talks to pilots. That's his job. Okay, everything else is just to help him give the pilots good information. And you can see that this happens in a big room. I do not apologize for the quality of this picture. This is an official picture that was published by a company. We're one of the companies where somebody got killed because he did his job. You might recall that, it was 2002. There was an accident involving a Russian airplane with children on it, and a cargo airplane. And it was a very unfortunate accident, and there was this one air traffic controller who was on duty that night, which was against regulations and lots of things. And some distressed Russian father came to his home and killed this guy. Okay? So, this is quite unique. You get killed for doing your job. I mean, apart from the military, this is quite unique. And that's why our pictures, they're all a bit weird. You can't recognize people on there normally. And this is just a guy that posed. He has nothing to do with air traffic control. Okay? So we don't publish pictures where you can see images of who was on duty for that reason. Okay? So sometimes you need to think about effects of your work in a different way. But anyway, this is just to say it's a special world. It's a world in which some of the rules apply in a different way. And that's what I'm trying to present to you today is there's hope. We can introduce Agile, but you might have to take it from a different angle. Okay, so what's this world made of? This world is made of airplanes, systems who track those airplanes, systems who treat the data coming from these airplanes, flight plan data, where the airplanes should be, where they are, where they're going. This is a traffic controller's workspace, and he talks to the pilots. That's it in a nutshell. Okay, there's a bit more than that, but you get the idea. In this world, these values are very, very strong. Safety above all, and I'm happy about that, as I said before. This is a good thing. Compliance, regulations, all that kind of thing. Standards, taking standard components if we can, common off the shelf, commercial off the shelf software. Process, following process, making sure you follow the process, documenting that you follow the process, lots of artifacts that we create on the side, and a big mantra, predictability. Things you don't see up there are your market, competition, business value, all that kind of jazz that you usually get when you go into Agile speeches. And we do have business value, but it's composed in a quite different way. So, things that are important, regulations, tons and tons of regulations, systems, and I'm just putting this up here because in our definition of a system is equipment, procedures, and human beings operating the equipment with skills, with a psyche, with my dog that died yesterday, so that's part of the system. And you have to make your procedures in a way that the system can work regardless of whether my dog died yesterday or not. Okay? So this is just to give you an idea that we look at all interventions we do on systems, on computers, on servers, on software, with an eye on safety, on standards and all that stuff, but we know that the human being is part of the system. It has to be part of the system. Okay? It has to do with resilience. And if you have all these documents, compliance, you need lots of traceability, from requirements to tests, to bug fixes, to change releases, and so on and so on. Okay? So we spend lots of money on these things. And sometimes you can think that this is actually kind of an obsession. I looked up the definition of obsession, and it's, in that sense, it is an obsession. Okay? We think about safety constantly. We think about how we can do things in a safer way constantly. And that should reassure you. I think that's positive. Okay, so when you come into this world, here's an example of regulation, just to give you a bit of a wording so you know what we're talking about. The software assurance level shall relate the rigor of the software assurances to the criticality of, this is ATM software, by using the severity classification scheme set out in section 4.324 of Annex 2 to Regulation European Commission number 296 to 5, combined with the likelihood of the occurrence officer and adverse effect. And I stop there. But you can get an idea of that this kind of requirement, this kind of expectation, that's quite unique, that's quite difficult to achieve and to prove. You have to write lots of stuff besides the software in order to make sure that someone reviews it and approves it and gives it the green light to go live. So, when you go into this and you say, well, we're going to do things cheaper, faster, and more flexible. You see the contrast here? These guys are just going to go, what? What are you talking about? Okay, that's not our problem. Our problem is not cheap. It's not the price. We're not in the market. Every country has their own air traffic control, so countries are not really competing for other people's airplanes. Okay, faster. We want to get people from A to B fast, but if a feature takes 2 years to implement, it takes 2 years. That's it. More flexible, not really a problem. So when they look at the Agile Manifesto, they see the traditional values. They see processes and tools, comprehensive documentation, and contract negotiation, and following plans. And they say that's all good. We value that too. Okay. And by the way, I use brackets to see the traditional kind of thinking, and the round things are more than the Agile way of thinking. So you will see brackets moving to rounds, and that might help you understand the whole picture. So the difficulty is to then go from this lecture, this way of reading the Agile Manifesto, to the bigger picture. Where you say, well, there's stuff that's actually more important than the stuff you have here. Okay, this is Mike Cohn came up with this table, and where it started. It's still not very healthy for the dialogue with your stakeholders, because they still don't understand why you're actually why you're valuing these things so much more than that, because they have value here. But as you can see, there's so there's actually more than just this. Remember, there are the 12 principles. Do you remember any of the 12 principles?
Yeah.
Well, it looks like you have something to look up afterwards. I've just summarized them a bit here. There are 4 principles that are basically, for me, values. Things that help you choose when you're in a situation where you can do things in one way or another way. Focus instead of utilization. We talked about this morning. Doing one thing and making sure that is getting out the door, instead of making sure my time is filled with something that I think is meaningful. Okay? Trust instead of contracts. When in doubt, don't write a contract, talk to the person and trust that. Okay, regardless of what level they are. Collaboration instead of heroism. Unless you're Chuck Norris, you should really not do things alone. Okay? Chuck Norris can do everything alone. But the others, we need collaboration and leads to better results. And you should be sustainable. One of the things I don't like about Scrum is the word sprint. Okay? Because a sprint is not really something you can sustain for a long time. At least I can't. So, think about what you're doing and is it sustainable over the long term. Introduce measurements to find out if you're going at a good pace. So these are kind of values. Then there are 4 that are more, 4 different ones. Let me explain them first. Face-to-face instead of asynchronous communication. It doesn't matter whether it's a document or an email or a voicemail or anything like that, but talking face to face is just the fastest feedback loop you can get. Okay? And it even goes into emotions and stuff like that because you can see the face of the person next to you, and if they start frowning, you know that you need to spend some more time explaining. Okay? So you don't get that with asynchronous, and even with emoji you don't get that. Okay? So asynchronous communication, not so good, face-to-face better. Technical excellence, instead of just fix it, let's just fix this quickly. Looking for technical excellence. Self-organization, not authority silos. And inspect and adapt, not practices copy-paste from other organizations. We talked about that this morning already, so I'm not going to go much further into that. This to me is has much more to do with corporate culture. This is what you talk to your new hires, your new employees about, and you say, we do things this way, okay? We talk face to face, we don't send emails to the guy next door. When we have a quick fix and something that's more sustainable, technically speaking, we do the technically excellent thing, unless we have a really, really, really good reason for that. And we let people self-organize, and we inspect and adapt continuously, okay? And the last four, they have to do with the customer and with the developers. So I put them in the middle because they base on values, and corporate culture is their attitudes and actions. The two on the left have to do with interfacing with the customer. The first is satisfying the customer. The second is welcoming change. That's one of the hardest. I'll talk about that a bit more later. And these two are more on the developer side. Set up your system so that you can deliver often. So you can learn, so you get feedback. Okay, that's the point of delivering often. And measure your releases. Measure how much time it takes for a feature to get out the door. Measure how frequently you can release, and be honest and transparent about that. It will tell you much about the quality of your systems, of your software. So I'm going into the depth of these 12 principles because in our case, they really helped us engage the conversation with our stakeholders who come from an ATC world. Because they can buy into some of these principles, and I'll go into the order of how we do that more than others. So we started out with some principles that we thought were already, embryonically there. There were baby steps that were there. For example, we have project reviews, okay? They're terrible because usually it's the project leader stuck with that task at the end of the project. The whole team's dismantled, so they're gone, and he has to write this report, and he has to fill in a form that says lessons learned, and he just goes, shoot, I don't have budget for this, I don't have time for this, I don't find this interesting, nobody's going to read it anyway, but I have to do it to be compliant, to close my project, to pass the gate. Okay, so we have something. It's terrible, it's not nice, but we have something. So we started building on that and saying, okay, let's start in this corner with the inspect and adapt part of things. So let's take this part of the Agile Manifesto, which is part of it, not just the traditional values part, and let's build on something else that we also have on board. Let me go quickly through that. For me, QA principle, quality assurance principles that we already have on board are also something we can build on. Quality is fitness for purpose. Who defines the purpose? Who determines whether it's fit? You have validation criteria right there. You can't test quality into a system after it's built, okay? Quality doesn't happen at the end of the development. It's part of the thing. It's not quality checking, it's quality assurance during the whole process. Validation is actually a handover of responsibility. Okay, if I go buy a car and I pay for it, then from then on it's my responsibility. If I go into an accident or something, well, I can't bring it back and say, well, it's your car. No, I bought it, so now I have responsibility for it. So teaching our stakeholders, our air traffic controllers, that when they say a feature is okay, that means that they have the responsibility for it. That brings in a whole new mindset about testing, validation testing for them.
Because up to now, they just said, well, what tests did you do? Let's just do the same kinds of tests in production. And then, if they pass, we're fine. Guess if they find bugs? Guess if sometimes they're not happy with the system because it doesn't fit their purpose? So bringing validation to a better level is one of the endeavors that we're still working on. Okay, so this is not all achieved. And one of the things that's easy to read but hard to do, project quality does not guarantee product quality. Okay, you can execute a project in a way that looks nice to all steering boards, stakeholders, financially, progress-wise, everything's fine. And in the end, you come up with a crappy version of the product. Because your change project was fine, but the product with that wooden leg is just not the same. Okay, the wooden leg is fine, but the product cannot fulfill its purpose with this wooden leg. So distinguish between project and product quality. I'm not going to go into that in depth because time is running. On the developer.com, they have a slideshow that quantifies some major quality assurance fails. 50 million people without power, $6 billion in losses, 17,000 grounded airplanes. Those are things that you can measure, and that's things your management can understand, that something has to change in your way of looking at processes, at products, at projects. If this kind of thing happens, then something is wrong, okay? And those all happened in the past 25 years. There's a silver lining on the horizon. In our company, we also have something called HRO. Does anyone know what HRO means here? Yeah? Okay. High reliability organization. Okay. It's a kind of organizations that look after nuclear power, submarines, airplanes. When organizations where when something goes wrong, it can have catastrophic consequences, and in which people like you and me work, who sometimes have lazy days, who make lots of mistakes. And so people looked at these kinds of organizations and said, how come these organizations, firemen, police, all these people who work under big pressure, how do they organize so that they have high reliability? And so we have some of the principles here. We note and learn from weak signals. Those are, shown in our offices all over the place. We can never know anything, we know that, and we must find out what we don't know. That doesn't mean that we then know everything, but we must know where our knowledge ends. That's really important, and we must agree that we don't know what's on the other side. We put operating workflows center stage. We don't get hung up with stuff that hasn't got to do with our operations. We're not surprised by unexpected events. That's an interesting one. We know things will happen that we have not foreseen. Okay, so we set up our communications and our ways of working together in a way that we don't go into panic mode when something unexpected happens. Something that we didn't know about, because we know that we can't prepare for everything, but we can prepare for a basic level of resilience. Okay? And deference to expertise, that was decentralization, like mentioned this morning, decentralize to competent people as much as possible. These things are on our walls. So this is a starting point that I took for our journey towards agility, saying, okay, let's take these starting points, the principles and these HRO principles that we have, and let's look at what we can do. First of all, we looked at getting into learning mode. One of the things that was, I explained the lessons learned form before. So there was no learning mode there. There was just, going through the steps of a process. And, the project manager was stuck with that task and nobody liked it. Nobody saw value, but nobody had the balls to actually remove this from the process. So we said, okay, let's improve this part of the process. So I brought in a kind of a pattern for retrospectives and said, I'll teach some people to lead retrospectives. I lead some of them myself. I'm quite passionate about retrospectives. So I'll lead some of them myself. And when people came into those retrospectives, they started saying, oh, but if I had known what you just said before to the colleagues, if I had known that at the beginning of the project, we might have done it in a very different way. I didn't know that. I'm glad to hear that. And so people started getting real value personally out of these retrospectives. And of course, this word of mouth then spreads to their managers. People start saying, I want to come to these retrospectives because they're actually good. And managers are scratching their head and saying, what happened? You know, from the project manager who disgruntlingly said, oh shit, I have to fill in this form, lessons learned, I don't like that, nobody's going to read it, to people who are saying, can I go to this lessons learned too? I was involved just 2 weeks, but I'd like to, you know, learn and give something. And so managers are going, hey, something is happening. Something useful is happening. We also help the managers sell it to their managers by saying, we're going to put all these lessons learned into a repository, okay? We're going to come up with a simple searchable repository, categorize these things. So when we train project managers, that's looking at this again, when we start bringing the project manager skills up, we already take into account what the lessons learned are and what the things that they might need in their projects are. So they know when they're handed a project, we still have project managers, when they're handed a project, when they look at the risks, they can go into this lessons learned repository and look what was already learned about these risks, how they can address these risks, and most of all, they can see who learned that, and they can go talk to these people, okay? Face-to-face conversation. So we looked at a repository, a kind of a procedure, and bringing up the skills of people, so we improved the inspect and adapt feedback loop, okay? This has nothing to do with measure releases, it's just because of the big picture, okay? This is ongoing. I've had emails last week from a guy saying, oh, I'd like to set up a major lessons learned training, and I'm wondering if you could spend an hour or two with me so that we can streamline this training and then put all the valuable stuff in there. So I'm not pushing this, someone else is. We have a department looking for innovation and change. They're doing that, but they're asking for input, and that's a good sign. The second part would be focusing on the stakeholder value. I'm using the word stakeholder here and not just customer for a purpose. You've seen that we mainly produce systems and including software and hardware for our air traffic controllers. They work in the same company as we do. We have about 800 of those guys and girls. They need to be trained. They have different requirements as users, but they're not the only stakeholders of these systems. Okay, in the tech department, there are lots of guys who are maintaining these systems over 25 years. So they have requirements about how they should be able to maintain things. It's like when you develop a new car, you don't just ask drivers what they want. You also go to see people in the garage and say, okay, how do we need to place the motor so you can easily service it? And is there an interface to plug in your computer so you can diagnose what went wrong? Because over the lifetime of a car, people are not just going to drive it; they're also going to have to repair it or change the tires. So there's lots of people that are stakeholders that are not users, that are not sponsors, but that are just involved with the system at a different stage. We have a lot of people supervising these machines. All of our systems are multiple redundant, and so some people are just sitting in the control room, looking at screens, seeing which server is up, which is down, which is restarting, and so on. And they have procedures what they need to do if one of these boxes goes red. Okay, they're all green normally. If one of them goes red, what do they need to do? And if they don't, if there's a problem, if they can't, if their procedure can't handle this kind of thing, then you're in deep trouble. Some of the pictures that I'm showing actually coming out of a report. that I dug up. It's a report that's more than 10 years old about a failure, a radar failure that we had, where during a bit more than 15 minutes in Zurich, there was no radar picture at all. Okay, that's not good. When you're trying to handle airplanes that are up there with people inside and you don't have a radar image, it's not very nice. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that produced a big incident, and the report in there with just the analysis and the recommendations, it's about 57 pages. Okay, that's 15 minutes of no radar, 57 pages of recommendations, of training, of European community regulations, of whatnot, actions that we needed to take and that we needed to prove that we had taken so as to not have this kind of incident anymore. Okay, there was no panic. No one was hurt. But this is just the kind of thing. You need to look at stakeholders at all levels, not just your users. Some of them might not be obvious stakeholders. So what we did here was say, okay, for the stakeholders, let's go into more of a face-to-face mode. Let's talk to the stakeholders. Let's introduce the concept of user stories. That was in one project. They piloted the use of user stories, and they were not quite sure what this thing was. We are used to working with use cases and rules, and so they were not very sure about how to position user stories in there. And so we helped them position user stories like test cases for the use case for different flows. So that helped them get all these use cases, get all these user stories from face-to-face conversations with our users, with our maintenance guys, with our supervision guys, getting all these different scenarios, analyzing them into use cases, and then having the whole traceability to the test cases already given by those user stories. But focusing on stakeholders, finding out who they really are, and asking them what is valuable for them. Because sometimes we get too involved, and we fall in love with our technical systems, and we like to do things in a wonderful way. We think we are the stakeholders, but we're not most of the time. We're just the builders, the developers, which is great. But talking to the stakeholders, asking them frequently, giving them feedback, I'll go into that when they come into releases. So this helps with the focus, because you can then imagine what it's like for a stakeholder to wait for one of his features. You can ask yourself the question, how would I work if my stakeholder was constantly sitting in the same office, writing his emails, but not looking over my shoulder, but would I be doing the same things? Would I be acting in the same way? Might be an interesting question, okay? If you have face-to-face conversations often, it changes your way of working. For management, we needed to make sure that they don't panic when we go into these face-to-face conversations. So we gave them a view on the backlog that came out of those conversations. And we said, look, we have so many items in the backlog. We have some of them estimated, some not yet. Some of them are mature, reviewed, and so on. So you can see that we're handling this, we're managing this in a very standard way. And they were quite reassured by that. And on the training side, as I said before, we always need to take that into account too. Before, we had a focus on people owning changes, change managers. Okay, there was a change owner who said, well, I want this new button on the screen. That's my change. I have the money. I give you the money. That's my change. Do it. And of course, they were getting into fights because this other guy needed the same resources for the same release date. And so, there was an internal political fight between those two. And nobody's looking at the overall product. They were just looking at one change versus the other change, one project versus the other project. So sometimes they were user change owners. Sometimes they were technical. There was technical stuff. We say, well, we need to do the database upgrade before we give you your feature. just because it's going to be much easier and so on. So there's infighting, endless meetings, endless political fights that are not producing value for the customer, not increasing the agility of the whole system. So moving these people towards a product owner role, change owners and technical analysts, that's a challenge that we're still facing, that we're still working on. They have very different mindsets, and just getting the idea of system quality and system life cycle across to them is a major challenge. So I'm in lots of meetings trying to convince people that it's actually good to look at something different than just the changes, because it will impact them. Okay, once we started these two, we started looking at these kinds of values in between. So ramping up our capacity to release. So now we know we're in a learning position, we know we're focused on the product, and now we can look at what is our capacity to release, how much can we get out the door, and how can we increase that capacity, okay? How can we ramp it up? I'm using the word ramp up because one of the things I think people should recognize when they see someone involved in Agile is that these people are continuously doing small incremental changes. They're continuously, they have this ramp up mindset, okay? Don't go from A to B in one step, do it in a smooth way, okay? So what we do here for technical excellence, we're looking at our system. Again, this is a bit to make sure that management is also on board. We're taking one of the big scaled Agile frameworks and just mapping some of our roles onto there so that management can see that we're not just inventing things out of air, but we're taking some of the roles and artifacts and we're not taking some other ones. But we're looking at saying, okay, we need some kind of integration platform, and we need to be able to integrate at a high frequency new items that have been produced by our suppliers, new features that have been finished, and we need to package them then and then come into our cadence of releasing things. Again, these two cadences, they're separate, but I'm not going to go into that. So we need to look at position ourselves as integrators, not as developers, and that's a different mindset. So we're system integrators now. System quality is a keyword that I already mentioned, and finding someone who's actually ready to be responsible for system quality is not so easy. It's easy when you're just, you just have a change and you just have to look after your change, and once that change is closed, hey, I'm moving to some other project, that's fine. But someone has an overall view of the system quality and says, look, Europe is moving towards a single European space, so we're going to be following planes a bit longer, and it's going to be a bit different in 10 or 15 years. So how can we prepare our systems now so that they're easier to migrate to those? We don't know exactly how it's going to look, but we need this kind of strategic horizon. Self-organizing, management is not very happy about this, but we help them understand it by saying, we're just doing this integration platform, you'll see the results, you'll be able to measure that we're able to deliver much more often, and that will make you happy. So we have the silos, we have the matrix organization that was mentioned this morning, but we monitor the risks and we make sure that we deliver often. So that's actually our primary measure of success. So this is our view. The welcome change is a bit grayed out because that's a really, really difficult one. I cannot say that we're there and that we have attacked that, and I don't really know today how I'm going to attack that in air traffic control. How I'm going to get these people to actually welcome change. They're just really, really into stability. So if anyone has an idea, I'd be glad to take those ideas around a cup of coffee or something like that, and then iterate and find out. Okay, remember, it's not iterative if you only do it once. Okay, so that's another thing that I think should be written on our foreheads, or T-shirts, if you like. We deliver often. We do lots of things, not only once. So I have a little bit of time for questions, and that was on purpose because I think this should be an interchange. Yes. Shoot, there's a question there.
Do you have a testing airplane?
We have we're actually not so much involved in airplanes, but we don't build airplanes, or we don't test airplanes. We send stuff to airplanes, and they send stuff back. And we do test our equipment, for example, ILS systems. We test them using real airplanes to find out whether they're precise or not, whether we can go live or not. But we don't test the airplanes. We use the airlines as input data for our tests.
Okay, thanks.
That remind, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, there's one. There's one here.
Okay, let me ask you a question. You told that the initial agile purposes was to make cheaper, more flexible, faster, and it was not the things that stakeholders wanted. So what they bought in agile? So what did they get from agile, if not faster, flexible, and cheaper? So what's the value for them?
Okay. It's actually a matter of perception. These questions about, this is, my point here was to say, we usually sell Agile by saying, you're going to get faster, cheaper, more flexible. And these guys were just saying, not interested. Okay? Now, we are getting that. We are getting faster. We are getting cheaper. That means that we can do more with the existing personnel. The purpose is not to make anything cheaper. We're quite expensive though, on airline taxes and stuff like that. We're quite expensive. So upper management is very open to the cheaper option, but they don't know how to do that. But my point here was to say, we usually sell it that way, but sometimes you could go through the principles and people will get these as side effects that they very much like, okay, but that they wouldn't have asked for because they're in their mindset, which is with those brackets. We've always done it this way. This kind of bug fix, it takes 2 months, it produces 200 pages of paper. That's just the way it is, okay? We don't need to improve that. There's no pressure, there's no market. My boss is not going to tell me off if I continue doing this. So why should I change that? Okay, that's the opposite of welcoming change. Okay, so with our usual Agile value proposition saying, hey, you should be happy about change, these people are going, oh, fuck off, not for me. I'm in a different business. So the interesting thing and the challenge for me here is to say, well, I think you would be better off, even though you might not understand it now. Let me take you by the hand and let me show you some things, some principles that you might actually recognize as being interesting, as being in line with the HRO principles that are on the walls everywhere, so you can sell them to your boss as being going the right way, and at the same time you're becoming more agile, more flexible, and cheaper and faster. But I wouldn't use those words today. I wouldn't in my company because they don't have value for them. Okay? It's a bit of a bizarre way of looking at things, I agree. But that's just very static software engineering. It's on.
Is it here, Bill? Okay. So you started from my question actually in answering this one. You said that welcome change, if I understood you properly, you failed to introduce this principle so far, or it wasn't completely successful, right? If I understood completely from all those 12 so far. So, but according to your HRO principles, I believe 6, right? Or 5, there is one that you anticipate any uncertainty, that it's okay if anything unexpected happens. That's one of your HRO things you follow. How does it overlap? Because to me, it overlaps completely any uncertainty. If you anticipate it, welcome it. So that means that you welcome any change, and that doesn't put you into panic mode.
Okay.
And so the idea of welcoming change is exactly the same. Why can't you sell it?
Okay. Let me put it this way. You can very well have a set of established rules and procedures and ways of dealing with, the unexpected. Think of, a police squad moving into a potential terrorist house. Okay. They have no clue what's inside, bombs, people, so they have to expect the unexpected. They have to expect to be surprised, but they know, and they've been trained, that, they don't need to know everything in order to start moving. They know that when they start moving, and, when I'm facing someone that I didn't expect to be there, I know how I'm going to react with my emotions and how I'm going to handle that. My colleagues know how they can react in this kind of situation. So even if we don't know what's out there, we can foresee, we can prepare for that, to handle it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be fond of, going into terrorist houses from now on. I'm not going to welcome that kind of change. This is just a constraint, and this is a way of making sure that what I can foresee, I treat well, and what I cannot foresee, we agree that we can't foresee that, and we agree on what we do in these kinds of situations.
I mean the agility of the processes, because you should change the training process once you've seen these things first time. As you said, there is a number of regulations which you change afterwards right away, and you should welcome it, right, to be prepared more next time. So that's the idea.
Well, that's how you end up with loads of regulations. If every time something unexpected happens, you write a new regulation. That's not really the most resilient way of doing it. But having the conversation is a good thing. So I'm not saying you shouldn't be having this conversation. Coming back to your question that you had before, yes, we're in the middle of this process. We haven't gone, the full circle. We've started with the learning. We've started with a product. We've just started with the product focus, and we're looking forward to going into the release capacity and moving that up. And I think welcoming change is going to be at the end of this ramp. One of the latest increments that we're going to do. But yeah. Good. Thank you very much. Please come and talk to me if there's anything else that you'd like to hear, know, or give me advice. Great. I'm here for that too. I'm here for the whole conference.